You're listening to the AI Moment with me, Jonathan Wagstaff.
And me, Danny Denhard.
And today we're going to talk about a mistake perhaps that people keep making, which is both Dan and I find that people come to us and they say, which model should I use? Should I use ChatGPT? Should I use Gemini? Should I use Claude? We've got Copilot at work. What do you think? And there's a lot of thought going into which model is the better model. And as we talked about in the past, we're still in a world where actually the models are leapfrogging each other. So if you're in early stages, certainly just pick one and play with that for a bit as you learn. That's really our advice there. But far more important than the model you choose is learning how to provide better context for the questions you ask, which means giving AI things like what's the goal you're trying to achieve, who's the audience it should answer for, what are the constraints around what you're talking about, maybe give it some examples, what format you want, what success looks like. In other words, asking it a question, but giving it a lot of information around that question that allows it to give you a much better answer. And time spent doing that is far more rewarding in terms of the quality AI answers you get back than time spent agonizing about whether you should be on Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or any of the others. Dan, what do you think? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I've seen very similar. I think often people get a little bit of FOMO because they see a video or they talk to someone in their industry or they see more likely an update on LinkedIn or Twitter, for instance, and then it sort of shows them what other people are doing and there's a bit of FOMO connected to it. When most businesses are using it for coding or analysis or assistant work, the output is really important, right? So the models of much or the tools that you decide to use are very similar. Some, they are breaking off and having more specialisms, but what that does mean is what you put in, the quality you put in is the quality you get out of it. And very often the models that you use, so the ones that you select aren't as important. Obviously you can go deeper with a lot of the models, but very often, if you use Copilot, you use Claude, you use ChatGPT, or you use Gemini, the outputs are very, very similar. And some of them are, when they're specializing in on that, then how you customize it and the context you put out and the conversation and the quality of input is the most important factors there. And AI needs the context, and I think that's what gets lost often. The more that you give it, the better context that you give it, the better results, and the more that you learn how to brief your LLM. So if you hop or you jump to another one, the same rules really do apply. And something I'd like to give something, Jonathan, I don't know how you think about this one, is if you gave a colleague one sentence and hope for them to be successful, it's going to be very difficult for them to do that. So the more context you give it, the more brief you give the better the brief that you give your colleague, the better the output generally is. And it's the same with AI models, with whatever one you use. That's kind of how I've been recommending and referring people to challenging this question.
Yeah, I agree, Dan. I think one way to think of AI, as you just alluded to, if you think about it as a very smart new person that's just joined your business, they're very smart, they know what they're doing, but they don't know much about you or your business. So to your point exactly, if you ask them to do a task on day one, you would give them some instruction about how they go and do that task. You wouldn't just say, do this, because they're brand new, they don't know how your place works. So treat AI like that. An interesting demonstration of how important context is, if people want to do an experiment, is if you ask you to do something, and say you've got 3 or 4 bits of information, just ask you to do something and it'll give you an answer. And then if you give it one more bit of information and say, how does that change things? You'll see it changed it a lot. And then if you give it another piece of information, you'll see. So if you want to demonstrate to yourself what a difference context can make, try giving it something to do, but only giving it one piece of information each time, and watch the answers change as it gets more and more context and more understanding. It's a really good demonstration of how context makes a huge difference. The other thing, of course, you can do, and I would certainly always recommend you do with anything like that, where you're into a new area, is one of the things you finish your prompt by saying is, ask me questions one at a time until you understand fully what I'm asking you to do, and you can give me a really good answer. So you're then prompting the AI to really pick up anything you might have missed, then it needs to do the work. That's, again, you'll see the number of questions it asks you and the kind of questions it asks you, which should help you in future with prompting in terms of, okay, these are the things it needs to know to answer this kind of question for me.
Exactly. The interview style is one that I think is underused. Interview me until I'm confident. Interview me until we've got enough information to finish this project, etc. I think that's the to and fro in of that is really important. I often say when you start your career, the good bosses are the ones that set the right guardrails, give you the goals, give you the milestones. The bad ones never gave you that. They just said, go and complete this. And I think that's how people should manage and think about managing AI in the future. So whether you see it as an assistant or a teammate or a team member which is coming, then that's something to consider. And the last thing I kind of recommend to people is if you can't write a brief for what you're actually looking for, then you should write the bullet points down and then work with AI to turn it into a brief. And they're the ways that you get the best outcome. And I really like Copilot's example of this, which is GCSE, which is goal, context, sources and expectations. I think you can break that down and use that on any model. You then get a much better output and then you can spar with it. So they're the best ways to get the most out of these tools, and iterations are completely fine.
I would agree with you about with your early days, if you develop your own or borrow a prompting framework, it's a great way to get into the habit. I think a couple of implications or a couple of things to say at the end. One is, I've thought this for a while, the prompting and clear thinking will become an important executive skill in the next 2 years. The winners will not be the most technical prompt engineers, but they'll be the people who can most clearly think about exactly what is it I want to achieve here. And so get better at really describing their situation or what it is they're trying to achieve, maybe with the help of the AI, maybe as a dialogue. And one of the things we both talked about before is one of the things you can do, of course, for prompting is you can write down what you're trying to achieve, and then you can say to the AI tool, write me a prompt to achieve this. But that requires you to think clearly about what you're trying to achieve. So all the parameters around it, and then say, write me a prompt to go and do this. So that clear thinking will be a key executive skill, I think. And the second thing we've talked about in previous pods, if there is information that you repeatedly will be needing to put into there to get answers you want, then create context documents. So the one we've talked about before is if you want to describe your business or your department, have a dialogue with the AI where you get it to ask you questions until it understands your department or your business completely, and then get it to pump that out as a summary and then copy that into a PDF document or into a document you save as a PDF. And then when you're re-prompting in future, you can upload that PDF and say, remember, this is all about us. Read that document, understand it. Now, you know all that. Now, what about this? And you can move it forward from there. So reusable content, some kind of company context document, or, a note around tone of voice, or it could be about your ICP. It could be about your product, those documents that allow you to shortcut teaching the AI again about what it is you're trying to do. And you get more consistent answers, and it's very quickly useful to do that.
I'll add in the show notes, and then the supporting newsletter, I'll add the link back to it in the document that we created, so you get the most out of it. And my top tip this week, and this topic, is all of the LLM providers, so all of the big companies that have large language models, are saying to push the limits of the prompts now, so they can go much longer, they can be much more robust. So definitely push the limits of it and create like what I call a stretch goal. If you're familiar with OKRs, then give it like a good output and then a great output, things that it looks like, and then push it harder because it needs it more and more. So that's my top tip this week.
Yeah, I'd agree. You won't break it. So push it as hard as you need to push it to get, see what it'll do for you, see how far it will go for you. You're not going to break it. You might run out of tokens, but okay, that's fixable. Good to see you, my friend, and I will see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for listening today, everyone. If you liked what you heard, please give us a rating and review in any of the podcast players. We have a supporting newsletter, which is aimoment.co.uk, that comes out on Mondays and Fridays with every pod, and we dive a little bit deeper. So please subscribe there. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.